for not sending you my book. However, it's hard to get it from Amazon because here in Poland we do not use Amazon like abroad. However, if I have in the future some free copies, I will send you.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah. I'll send you
I
our
can
address.
send you some PDFs, some like older essays, not book in PDF.
Oh
However,
yeah.
in the meantime, I can send you some of my
Yeah.
works.
Well, I've been watching your videos and stuff, and we are live now. So we are live with Aleksander Czeszkiewicz. I think that's how you say it, right? Czeszkiewicz.
Yeah, Czeszkiewicz.
Czeszkiewicz. And yeah, I've been watching because you were sort of teamed up with Michael Laflemme, one of our past guests, because he had a really cool book on Atlantis. So you guys have your Atlantis Bros thing going on, and I was watching some of your other videos. So I don't know, it's just good timing. You know, we're going to this Cosmic Summit conference, and of course, ancient civilizations and catastrophism is a popular topic there. So I thought I wanted to have you on prior to that, so I can get some new insights to lost civilizations, because I seem to be ready for that to approach that like more than ever. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a synchronicity. Many people right now are into this topic. I think it's being popular again, like trendy again.
Yeah. Why is that, do you think?
I think because maybe of the news with the SARS scan under the pyramids, recent Zahi Hawass interview, which was bad for the Zahi Hawass in the opinion of plenty of people. And I think that people are starting to dig deeper and deeper, not only to the sources, to the like textbooks and all the academic things that we can find, but they want to know the truth, and then they start digging deeper and deeper. I think it's because of that.
It's sort of our natural inclination, right? To just dig deeper and know more, right? I'm really realizing that we have this, or at least I have this appetite for learning more things, more stuff. So
Yes,
but
yes.
what is it about the ancient civilization, right? Like, do you think that we're going to get to the point where it's just accepted that we've had sort of an advanced ancient civilization in the past, let's say pre collapse of the ice age, younger Dryas?
hmm Yes, actually, it's a fun coincidence that Plato wrote the fictitious story in the apostrophes about Atlantis, and the date that he is giving us is coinciding with the end of the last ice age. I was perplexed when I first found it out, and at the similar time, there are plenty of other coincidences, like start of sedentary lifestyle by humans on the area of Fertile Crescent and many others. So I started with that, with the basic things, and I said, wait a second, can it be really a coincidence that Plato is giving us the exact date, which is the ending of the last ice age? And he's saying us that, oh, there was this Atlantis civilization that sank about 9,000 years before Solon, when actually it was the ending of the last ice age, so it was logical that ice age was ending, ice caps were melting, so maybe some kind of civilization, of course, sank during that time. And I think that it's even more than that. I was very, very interested in history at an academic level, at mainstream history for many, many years. And I realized by discoveries in science that we do not know that much about our history. Because when I went through all the discoveries, all the historical discoveries when it comes to our ancient, unknowing of our ancient history, I was actually stunned because we do not know almost anything about ancient Egypt, for instance, up until the Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to it at the end of 1700s, beginning of 1800s. So a little bit more than 200 years ago, we knew almost nothing. We knew that there is something in ancient Egypt, but we knew almost nothing about it. And before that, we thought that the first civilizations were Greece and Rome, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And then with the Napoleonic expeditions, we started digging deeper and deeper into ancient Egyptian history. And we said, wait a minute, ancient Egypt seems to be older than Greece and Rome. So we took a step and we took the roots of civilization back by many thousand years. The same was with the famous, nowadays everyone knows that Sumer was the first mainstream accepted civilization. But we haven't discovered any kind of civilization in the area of Middle East up until 1840s, which is about 180 years ago. So less than 200 years ago, we knew almost nothing about ancient Sumer, and goes on and on and on. In the 70s, 80s, famous alternative history views were being popularized, and the first thing skeptics were saying, we have no evidence that anyone was capable, for instance, of building Sphinx before the first pharaohs, because we had no evidence at that time of humans being capable of creating such megalithic marvels. But then at the end of 90s of the previous century, of course, we discovered Göbekli Tepe, which was dated around the end of the last ice age. And we again took the roots of not civilization, maybe because Göbekli Tepe isn't accepted as a whole civilization. However, we actually had evidence that humans were capable at the end of the last ice age of building megalithic stuff. So maybe there was Atlantis somewhere, and maybe there were plenty of other cultures, civilizations, cities, and so on and so on.
What do you think it's going to take to accept this, like to have the mainstream accept it? Because to me, this was all accepted, not all of it, but you know, a lot of the researchers acknowledge this in the 1800s, like you're talking about the 1800s, right? And they even wrote in some of their books that it was obvious that there was another civilization prior, like for example on Easter Island or some of these Cyclopean and architectures. They thought that was another civilization or another race of people. But then in the 70s, 1970s, it seems like there was a concerted effort, at least as far as Atlantis is concerned, to sort of say, no, the geology doesn't match, even though they were wrong about that. But they said, oh, the geology doesn't match. So there was no other advanced ancient civilizations. But now I feel like we're crawling our way out of that suppression to a new area of opening. Do you think would you agree with that?
Yes, I would say that I agree with that, especially that nowadays, because actually of the globalization, because we have internet access, we can talk. I'm in Poland, you're in Canada, I think, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk from miles and miles apart, and people can travel into many places. Still, some of the places, like in Egypt, in Peru, and many others, are hidden and are not accepted to be open to tourists. However, there are plenty of places people can go, people can take pictures, people can even live stream from these places, so you can't hide that much. And I think that, you know, the truth will always come out. Here in Poland, we have a saying that the oil will always come up if it is mixed with water. The same with truth, it is there, and you can hide it, you can try to hide it, but with enough evidence, there is too much of it. It is like the paradigm shifts in science. First, you have one anomaly, and it doesn't fit with your paradigm, your view of the world, of an area of knowledge, science. And then there are more anomalies. And at some point, there are too many of the anomalies, and these anomalies start shredding the current paradigm, the previous paradigm worldview. And that's how science evolves. And I think that because of all the discoveries all around the world, not only the Göbekli Tepe, we are going into uncovering at least more truth about these distant epochs. Because it was actually crazy to me when I was first learning history, prehistory, and all of this stuff, that our written history, let's say it started about 4th to 3rd millennium BC, so about 6 to 5,000 years ago. And anatomically modern humans, according to genetics and biology, have appeared somewhere. It was a few years ago when I was writing my book, it was 200,000 years ago, but now it is even conservatively accepted that anatomically modern human appeared about 315,000 years ago. So we are talking about less than 5% of written history, and then all of other history of humanity is lost. According to science, not lost, of course, but people were primitive, were simple hunter-gatherers, no civilizations, when in such long periods, hundreds of thousands of years of time, of course, there could have appeared some kind of culture, civilization, city, and things like that.
So what's some of the best evidence you would think, right, or do you think of right now that shows of an advanced pre Younger Dryas civilization?
I think Graham Hancock was right with titling his book Fingerprints of the Gods, because I do not say that we have ultimate evidence, 100%, because it is all matter of debate, of interpretation. We have some facts, some like monuments that exist, we cannot deny that, but it all is about interpretation if we interpret them to be older, younger, and so on. And Graham Hancock was right to call his book Fingerprints of the Gods, because I think that we have such fingerprints of the previous people before us, let's say Atlanteans or some kind of people from the previous civilization, previous lost civilization. And these fingerprints can be found in many actually areas of knowledge, because not only mention the Cyclopean walls, which may be some kind of fingerprint of these people who were traveling the world, and when they traveled, they left behind such megalithic architecture, which is very, very similar, I found also in my research. As I mentioned, on Easter Island, it is almost the same as to the Cyclopean walls in Peru, in Cusco, the famous Sacsayhuaman, and in many other places in South America. However, the same kind of architecture, megalithic architecture, can be found in the Mediterranean, in Greece, in Italy, and also in Egypt. The base of the pyramid, and I think it's best seen in the pyramid of Menkaure, the base of it is made of the same Cyclopean walls. It looks very, very similar, and similar things can be found, for instance, in Asia and Oceania. And because we may think, okay, all the people who are primitive and wanted to build something built out of stone. Okay, it is a primitive thinking. I agree that it is logical that it could be independent. However, all of them have similar features, like being polygonal, not only like in squares, but also many, many angles, and they fit very, very well together, not like there are plenty of holes in them. The same with other things, like for instance knobs that are outside of these stones, probably to pull them with some kinds of, let's say, with some kinds of, I don't know, tools. So these are knobs that are seen on these blocks, and similar knobs can be found again in all of these regions all over the world. The same with, in some regions we can also find the famous metal, probably metal, we do not know well, clamps that connected some of these megaliths. So these are one kind of fingerprint of these pre-Diluvian people, but the other fingerprints can be found, for instance, in anomalous maps from all over the world. And again, tribute to Graham Hancock, because Graham Hancock found at least a dozen or more maps that fit with the pre-Diluvian, pre-Ice Age view of the world. He actually talked with plenty of geologists. They were mapping entire world for him. I think it was Glenn Milne who helped him map the entire world, how it looked like before the end of the last ice age. And actually some facts, the sea level rose from the end of the last ice age up until nowadays 120 meters. I imagined, when I heard about it, I imagined standing on the beach. I'm living near the coast, near the Baltic Sea here in Poland. And I imagine standing on the beach and seeing 120 meters sea rise. I think plenty of different cities, civilizations could have sunk during such a rise of sea levels. The same with the total area that sank during that time. It was about the same as entire North America, including Alaska, Canada, USA, Mexico, entire continent. So it was a huge area that sank during that time. And I thought, well, this could be the case that actually plenty of cultures, plenty of, let's say, cities, maybe not even civilizations, if we're skeptical, sank during that time. And going back to the maps, these maps are showing us that there were some footprints from these people, because all these maps are not that old, not from before the previous ice age. These are some Renaissance maps, some medieval times maps, some even ancient maps that are showing us some features, like for instance the Beringia Bridge connecting in the past Asia with North America, and plenty of other. There are some kind of islands, some kind of land bridges, and more. Graham Hancock analyzed all of that, and these show us that there was some kind of knowledge in antiquity, and then that it survived through medieval times to Renaissance, and this was the knowledge of the entire Earth, and it can be later connected with maybe other theories, like for instance, the theory that megaliths are aligned to each other, to some kind of grid on the entire planet, and that people in the very, very ancient past knew how the entire Earth is formed, knew the dimensions of the Earth. I actually, during my high school years, for a history essay, I will send it to you through email later, I actually studied prehistoric pre-pyramids of Giza measures of the Earth, and I found out that there are plenty of traces of such measures, that Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the famous Greek mathematician, astronomer, wasn't the first, but he probably conducted an experiment just as nowadays kids at school can combine and can perform an experiment to check out the gravity, for instance, or some kind of other measure of something. He did the same thing, so he didn't invent the measures of the Earth, he wasn't the first, but he just conducted experiment. Maybe he found a scroll. Eratosthenes of Cyrene was the head director of the Library of Alexandria, so that's another kind of
just
conspiracy.
let's
Yes?
slow down a bit. So you're talking about
Okay.
Aristophanes, right?
Yes.
Okay, just so yeah, because you said it pretty fast, so I want to make sure people know who you're talking about.
Eratosthenes of Cyrene,
Yeah,
who was the first inventor according to modern paradigm of the measures of the Earth, the first person to measure the Earth. And I was doing investigation in my high school. Teachers weren't very happy about that, of this topic, of course. They were happy that, I was doing the research, but they weren't happy because, they may have gotten themselves into some problems. However, there are plenty of traces that the measures of the Earth were known before Eratosthenes of Cyrene. And I think that if we combine all these things, so megaliths all over the world, pyramids all over the world, again, pyramids, I think, it's just casual that people stack rocks together in form of a mound or a pyramid, because you cannot build tall things straight because they will fall off, of course. However, I think that there are more similarities, just not only the pyramid shaped of the pyramid. However, if you combine all of these megaliths, pyramids all over the world, not a single cases of that, megaliths, pyramids, maps showing the world before the last ice age, Plato telling us that it was at that time there was some kind of advanced civilization in this prehistory. Then you combine, for instance, the measures of the Earth, which may be connected to these anomalous maps. You see that there was some kind of society, some kind of group of people, maybe these famous teachers of mankind, which is another thread of the entire theory or hypothesis of...
all seven of them.
I don't know how many. I, of course, in many also found that there were 7 people, and I can talk about it also here. However, in plenty of, actually all over the world, we find mentions of some teachers of mankind. In some places there are 7 of them, there are similarities between them for sure. However, we all over the world find mentions of gods, of some kinds of teachers, demigods, creatures that were teaching mankind. And I think that there was some kind of group of people, smaller or larger, that had this knowledge and traveled the entire world. Maybe they taught primitive hunter-gatherers that they found there while traveling, just as we today, or let's say 50 years ago, had plenty of tribes who were living primitive lifestyles. And that's the mystery of history. And I think that we have all these fingerprints, as Graham Hancock named his book, of these gods, of these people, of this advanced society, lost civilizations. And we find it, as I mentioned, in many of the areas of knowledge. We find a big picture that there is something mysterious about prehistoric past.
What do you think? How long do you think it'll take before we sort of reach a saturation point where it becomes like the paradigm shifts, like you were explaining? Like, is that happening pretty quick, do you think? Because there does seem to be some interest from higher levels. I know that like even I was on a show the other night where they were talking about Peter Thiel, one of the billionaires from America, kind of more of the right-leaning perspective. He is talking about funding some of these expeditions, or like there was rumors that he wanted to find. It seemed like he was more interested in to find some sort of ancient alien artifact as opposed to like just open up the mysteries of Cyclopean architecture. But I mean, there is some powerful interests, I would say, that now are getting like openly interested in it. There's even like US politicians talking about ancient history. So I feel like we're on the cusp of it becoming sort of hard to hide anymore.
Hmm. Yes, for sure, because nowadays in the globalized world, as you mentioned, there are people like Thiel or others who have so much money that governments are often not any blockage for them to, oh, I will go and investigate it. I have so much money, I will send people there. So I think that with such people and many other maybe people who will get interested into this topic, we will find more and more. And as I mentioned, we are finding. First was Göbekli Tepe, then Karahan Tepe, and plenty of smaller tepes who are showing us that there were some kind of society of people before the times that society was accepted to be. And I think that maybe it will take, I don't know, a few years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But I think that, as I mentioned before, there are too many things. They try to hide, as some, for instance, with the Göbekli Tepe stuff that was recently shown by, for instance, Bright Insight and plenty of other people, that they were, they stopped the excavations for future generations, as they were saying. Then they planted some trees and so on, and plenty of similar things happen all over the world. We here in Poland have Góra Ślęża, which is a famous kind of prehistoric monument. At least it is thought to be prehistoric because there are later medieval things on this. This is some kind of mount, Eltel mountain. And I know a few people who wanted to research this thing, who wanted to go there. And when they went there, because publicly it is legal to go there, and okay, you can search for something, it isn't anything like military base or something. However, when they went there, they were being observed all the time, but by some shadow people, not like public figures like military or police, but there were some people hiding behind and watching them. And then later, when they started, some measures, some kind of, they took the equipment with them, then some people came to them and tell them that you shouldn't do that here or you would be in danger. So
Wow.
I think that there are all over the world. If you think of other places, there are such kinds of things. Even in modern world, it was more popular, I think, and more often found like 20 years ago and more. However, even nowadays, there are such attempts to not search for some kinds of things hidden there.
What do you think about? Well, I mean, the other interesting thing is that those Easter Island statues look a lot like the relief carvings in Göbekli Tepe, which is interesting. But I was just watching today, not watching, but looking through some of the videos, I guess watching on Facebook of these guys that were just up at the Boneyard in Alaska, which seems to point to something else, something besides just sea level rise. And, how did all these creatures get crammed into one spot to die together? They're all fucked up. It seems like they got washed in there somehow. So do you, I guess, what do you think, or what sort of cataclysm do you entertain for that sea level rise? What do you think happened to sort of transition this over from one spot to the next?
Great question. However, I will start with the stages, because here I open my book. It's Deja Vu, has everything already been. And here you can, maybe you cannot see. However, I found plenty of stages, not only Easter Island and Göbekli Tepe connection. However, plenty of stages with, just like Easter Island, very exaggerated shin and hands on their bellies. These are kind of the statue, and I would say from where? From Chachapoya in South America, there are similar statues. Of course, on Easter Island, there are similar statues. Göbekli Tepe, of course, and from Urfa, near Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. So in plenty of places, we find such statues with hands on their belly and exaggerated shin, which is another thing. Just like Cyclopean walls are beyond just casual walls made of stone. However, there are plenty of similarities, and I think that here we also have, because why people of Göbekli Tepe choose two actually points, because as with the pyramids, one point would be that it is easier to build something pyramid shaped, cone shaped, than creating a tower, because the tower would easily fall off because of the gravity, because of if we tried to make it in stone. The same with such stages. If all of the stages were exaggerating, let's say something to do with fertility, or maybe they just exaggerated this hands on belly, maybe symbolizing the birth or being pregnant, right? But here we've got 2 points. We've got, of course, this hands on bellies and these exaggerated shins, which are, in my opinion, beyond coincidence. The same as I mentioned with pyramids, the shape is the one thing. However, if we take a deeper look at the pyramids, we will find similar structures, similar alignment of them, similar dimensions even in some cases, and then we will see that maybe they are a little bit different architecturally, because here we've got pyramids made of granite, sandstone, and such materials, and then in Mesoamerica we have different pyramids, a little bit different. However, they have all the same or similar blueprints, all the same thoughts behind it. There are plenty of many connections. However, I will come back to the catastrophe because it is also one of the main areas of interest when it comes to lost civilizations, because how they were lost. Of course, some of the even our known civilizations from ancient past or even later times just vanished because not of catastrophe, but because just of natural causes, let's say. However, when it comes to the end of the last ice age, we may think similarly at first that, okay, ice ages in the very, very prehistoric times before that were coming and going. Even nowadays, we may be heading into the next ice age. And we know from data, from geological records, that they were ice ages coming and coming and going. And there were a few of them. And actually, the end of the last ice age was during the times, of course, of Plato, approximately 12,000 years ago. So 9,500 BC to about 10,500 BC. The last part was called, of course, the famous Younger Dryas, from which the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis took its name. And there are plenty of theories about how this ice age ended, because we think whether it ended naturally, as I mentioned, ice ages come and go, or cataclysmically, as some people would say. And if cataclysmically, what was this cataclysm? And how was it? And plenty of people were telling us, because I connect the Great Flood, because there are plenty of flood myths and legends all over the world, and I connect that with the end of the last ice age, because it is logical when you think at first, okay, ice age was ending, ice caps were melting, maybe the meltwater was the Great Flood. And skeptics are telling us that, okay, floods are natural all over the world. Even last year in Poland, we had huge flood that actually made me think more even about these flood stories, because I've seen plenty of footage of entire streets with buildings, with asphalt on them, and then a few days later after flood there was nothing. It was like natural habitat. You wouldn't imagine that a few days ago at that place, at that shot of the camera, there was some kind of road with some kind of smaller buildings near the road. So I was shocked how quickly things can be destroyed and how actually high the waters can be. And it was just a casual flood. It wasn't something like the meltwaters or the sea coming and, coming out into the land. No, it was just a casual flood, nothing crazy. So I imagine what was there happening at the end of the last ice age. And what is interesting, I found flood myths, because plenty of people say, oh, flood myths are independent of the sinking of Atlantis and lost civilizations. However, I found a few myths, and at least 3 from different locations, that are telling us this exact scenario that we are thinking of, that there was some kind of cosmic cataclysm, whether solar flare, comet, or other celestial body hitting the Earth, and from that cataclysm, this cataclysm led to the melting of the waters, and the melting of the waters then led to the Great Flood and maybe to sinking of lost civilizations like Atlantis. And I found similar myths. For instance, in the Rig Veda, there is a mention that Indra is shooting his fiery bolt into a great dragon called Vritra, and he kills with this fiery bolt this dragon called Vritra, and then from this Vritra, from this dragon, all the blood is coming out and is flooding the entire planet. And I thought, well, maybe it's a metaphor for some kind of celestial fury body, whether comet or other celestial body, or maybe even solar flare to some extent, hitting the ice caps that were plentiful during the end of the last ice age. Most of Europe was under the ice caps before the end of the last ice age. And if it hit that, maybe people have seen that, it led to melting of these waters, of these ice caps, and then the water flooded the entire Earth. But I found similar myths in plenty of other regions. Here we've got India, and now we've got, for instance, Ragnarok in Scandinavia, totally isolated regions by both space and time. And then we've got that gods are killing Ymir, great ice giant. And here we've got even a greater metaphor of some kind of great ice giant who is killed by the gods. And when gods kill the great ice giant, he is melting, and from this ice giant, all the waters from his blood and all of the waters are coming out and again flooding the world. So I think this is even closer to what we are thinking, that, ice giant, and from the ice there is the flood. But then I found the myth of Iroquois, and Iroquois in North America are telling us that the sun hit a giant frog which had all the water in it. So imagine a frog bloated with all the water, giant frog with all the water. It was even bloated. And the sun hit this frog, and from this frog the waters again came out and flooded the world. So I think, yes, okay, maybe some of the myths, like the biblical flood, are only flood myths, and maybe people, especially skeptics, may not see any connection between them and lost civilizations or any kind of Ice Age civilization or ending of the Ice Age. However, here we've got three myths from three isolated regions, both by space and time, telling us that, okay, some water came out, but it was hidden, stored in somewhere, and something hid in it, either sun or gods or this fiery bolt in the Rig Veda. So I think this can be a metaphor of what happened at the end of the last ice age, whether it was comet like in the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, or solar flare, like I think Robert Schoch is more a proponent of solar flares during our prehistory leading to some kinds of catastrophes. I don't know for sure 100% what was it. I think that there are some evidence for that, some evidence for that. We need to, of course, dig deeper and explore more. However, I think that even in myths we have these legends that the ending of the ice age or some kind melting of the ice caps was not random and caused a global deluge.
What about some of the alternative theories about the time frame? Like, are you pretty stuck with the time frame of the mainstream Younger Dryas explanation? Because I know there's some researchers about this ancient wisdom and these books, and they think that this only goes back to like 3359 BC or something like that there was a massive shift or cataclysm, that it's happened more frequently closer to us in time than these ancient ones. Have you ever heard of that, or what do you think of those?
Yes, actually my book is Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, which the title is all about the cyclical time, because one of the chapters is solely dedicated to the idea of cyclical time. And I think that for sure there were probably multiple of catastrophes of plenty of kinds of catastrophes, and I think that yes, something either 3100s BC or 3300s BC, something happened back then, because at that time most of the first civilizations maybe not appeared exactly but flourished. We start seeing civilization at this point in time. Maybe Sumer was a bit older than that, but Egypt, Narmer-Menes, the famous first pharaoh, united Upper and Lower Egypt about 3100 BC, 3100 years BC. The same in India, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro about 3500 BC. Sumer also about that time was a bigger civilization. And even when it comes to the ancient texts, as you mentioned, for instance, in the Mahabharata, which is both one of the oldest known texts, but also one of the biggest and longest known texts we have today, ancient one, of course. In the Mahabharata, there is a mention that the end of the Kali Yuga, or the switch of the ages into Kali Yuga started during the night from 18th to 19th February 3102 BC. And they are saying us that at that date there was a great flood from the switch of the ages, I think, into the Kali Yuga, if I remember correctly. So I think here we've got this exact date, which coincides with, I would say, the flourish of the first civilizations in Egypt, Sumer, and India. This we know are the first accepted civilization. So I think that yes, there could be something before that, but geologically speaking, the end of the last ice age, I think, at least in our time frames, because maybe our time frames are all wrong, but if we see what was what was 3000 years BC approximately, and what was before that, we may say that the ending of the last ice age was for sure older than that, and it was approximately during the times Plato is telling us the Atlantis sank about 9000 years before Solon, 9600 years BC. So I think that Plato's Atlantis cataclysm was one before that, but I accept that probably there were a few others, bigger, smaller. I don't know for sure. We do not have, I think, so much evidence about that. The more I learn, the more I see how little we know, especially about these very, very ancient times.
You're muted, bud.
One near Poland where Doggerland got flooded, which was one of the more recent ones. Like I was surprised to hear that supposedly only happened. I can't remember the exact date, 1000 or 2 BC maybe or something like that. That whole area right near just west of Poland, I guess. Yeah. So
yes, west of yes.
Yeah. So what did you think about the Zahi Hawass interview with Rogan then? I mean, I found it pretty interesting that he was like, oh yeah, magic is real, but then any kind of alternative theory about Egypt, I haven't heard of that. I haven't heard of that. Like, oh, we already have all the answers. I mean, what did you think of that?
Yes, this is a nice comment about it. There are plenty of things which were both funny, both strange, and so on. And for instance, Zahi told that he never heard of Zep-Tepi, the famous golden age in the very, very distant past. And when Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan knows a bit, or I think he knows a lot, not a lot, but he
quite
knows
a bit.
something.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yes, he isn't like a complete layperson about that because, of all his interviews with Graham Hancock and plenty of other people. And he's very interested, it seems, into these topics. And I think Joe Rogan had very nice question with these ancient list of kings from ancient Egypt telling us that Egypt was 36,000 years approximately before the first pharaohs, before this Narmer menace who united the Upper and Lower Egypt. And Zahi Hawass then said, no, it's nothing, it doesn't exist, I think he said it's a new age fantasy. However, we have all the sources, true sources, not like channeled sources, telling us that yes, there are this list of kings, there are plenty of them. And at least I often mention 3 of them because it's a very interesting case, because this list of kings are telling us, yes, there was something about 39,000 BC, 36,000 BC, and Egypt has a much longer history than it is accepted. However, what is interesting that all the pharaohs that are listed from the first ruler Narmer-Menes are approximately 70 or even more % accurate to what we know from modern Egyptology. So we have all these lists of kings going back 30,000+ years before the first pharaohs, and Egyptologists are accepting only from the first pharaoh on, and they are telling us that these lists are very accurate in these manners. So what about previous pharaohs? If they're accurate with all the pharaohs after Narmer-Menes, maybe they're also accurate about the times before him, of course. However, and I think it showed Zahi Hawass that Zahi Hawass is, I don't know, closed for, as you mentioned, he believes that maybe there was some kind of magic, but he doesn't believe that there were mythological god-like rulers. And it showed his ignorance, because he mentioned, no, there are no such lists of kings when there are plenty of them. These are true sources. Some are very, very old, like Palermo stone, which is, I think, approximately plus minus 100 or 200 years from the times of the pyramids, the Giza Pyramids. There are other texts, like from about 1500s BC, the famous Turin's Kings list. And then there are much more recent ones, like the Manetho's Kings list from approximately 3rd, 2nd century BC. So we have from plenty of times, because the ancient Egyptian history lasted, according to mainstream, for about 3,000 years. So we have plenty of lists of kings from different times during its history, telling us the same, almost approximately the same lists of kings, and showing us that, well, something was 36,000 years before those first pharaohs. And what is interesting, it can be connected to Atlantis, because Plato is telling us that it was Solon who went to Egypt. He was traveling through Egypt, and we have other historians who are telling us that yes, Solon went to Egypt, like Plutarch or Herodotus. And during his visit into Egypt at the city of Sais, he heard from the Egyptian priest that there was something 9,000 years, that Atlantis was 9,000 years before their interaction at Sais with Solon. So I think, well, it is all connected. And if we know sources from ancient Egypt that are telling us of a much older history, then maybe Solon really heard such story as the story of Atlantis from the Egyptian priest. However, let's come back to Zahi Hawass. It showed this example that he's very ignorant of other sources because he's an archaeologist, Egyptologist, and he doesn't know like the theory, the beliefs of ancient Egyptians. He's only interested in digging. He also didn't know anything about Zep-Tepi, which is of course a real thing, and also a few sources. But there were plenty of other things. Zahi Hawass, for instance, said that he and Mark Lerner are the only open-minded Egyptologists. So it was crazy that he, who is considered to be and acts as if he is the most conservative one, he says he's the only, with Mark Lerner, open-minded one of all the Egyptologists. And what about other Egyptologists with their fringe, of course, theories or alternative views on ancient Egypt? They are close-minded. And only Zahi Hawass and Mark Lerner are open-minded. So there were such quirks in there. Of course, there were also some kind of revolutionary things, like Zahi Hawass telling that he will open some kind of chamber this year, or that there are some chambers in the Great Pyramid of Giza. But I think he also gave a few good meritorical points, actually, which are not often shown publicly, not often talked about publicly, which I also, during my research, and not only for my book, but also, as I mentioned, I was researching such things for essays at school in the past, I found this information only after buying very expensive academic books. You couldn't find such things online or even in some kind of archive.org or even on academic websites that are free for people. These are the things that are really only shown in these academic journals, that you need to pay some kind of monthly or yearly subscription to access them, or in these truly academic boring books, not like book about ancient Egypt, which is academically correct, popular science, which is called, only with this very boring, with all the details. We went here, we dug this, then next day it was this, all of these kinds of things. And he mentioned of course, the recent ones, and he mentioned, I think, great discoveries even by him. However, he also attributed some of the discoveries to himself, which were not his. For instance, the Osiris shaft, the famous Osiris shaft going on the Giza plateau, very, very deep into the ground, cut through solid rock. Then underneath it we have plenty of rooms, and there is the second level. This is an incredible structure, to say the least. He mentioned that he discovered it. No, he did not discover it. He only re-excavated it. He pumped out the water because it was underground shaft, so there was water there, so he pumped it out, and then he prepared it for public visitations, and now even some kind of tourists can access it. Not all, but in some instances tourists can access this Osiris shaft. So he attributed some of the discoveries to himself, which were not his. It was another point. However, the point was that he mentioned a few good things which are hard to find, like, for instance, not nowadays it is much more accessible. However, even during the show it was very often said that, Jimmy, pull out this tool or this image, and they weren't able to find it anywhere on the internet. And he said, it is in my book, and I know what he's talking about, that these things are only in these academic journals, in these academic books, and are not very often shown publicly, which is a real issue for other people to know about ancient Egypt. And then, for instance, we sometimes are in problem because we think, oh, we do not have enough about this, we do not know enough about this or this. However, then it turns out, and I myself in my, let's say, alternative researcher career had some moments like that, yeah, it wasn't publicly available, but there were some details there, dug, excavated, found, but they were hidden in this like academic books or journals. So he mentioned, for instance, the famous Mirrors journal, which mentions, of course, the travel, the logistics from quarry to the Great Pyramid, of how the blocks were transported, but we do not know if they were transported after the Great Pyramid, maybe for some kind of restoration or even for some kind of other buildings, because the Giza Plateau is full of smaller pyramids, of the Sphinx, of course, full of temples and plenty of other things. And he mentioned also the details, very interesting details, which were, I think, paradigm shifting to some extent, of course, that people who were building something at the Giza Plateau at the times of Khufu were actually, well, they were having good food. They were, I think, slaughtering goats, slaughtering cows and other animals. So they weren't malnourished, for instance, but we do not know if they were the builders of the Great Pyramid or these were just renovating stuff or building other temple complexes and so on. He also, it was also a bit problem for Zahi when he mentioned, for instance, that all the stones from the Great Pyramid of Giza were found locally nearby the place where the Giza Pyramid is standing on, which is true to some extent, but again, it was good that Joe knew some stuff about it, because he asked, wait a minute, what about the granite interior chambers of the Great Pyramid? And Zahi asked, oh, except for that. But actually there are a few more exceptions to that. But yes, some of the blocks were found locally and they were cut through the plateau, because even the name plateau, so it is kind of a hill to some extent. So the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, most probably was cut through the rock, so some kind of base of the pyramid was used. For building, it was used just rocks which were found there, and then other stones were put into the Great Pyramid. And I knew, because I read some Zahi Hawass books before that. Zahi Hawass was saying, no, there aren't that many blocks in the Great Pyramid, because up until now it was mentioned that about 2.3 million blocks were used in the Great Pyramid alone. And he mentions, no, it was 1 million and something, I think 1.2 million, so about half of the original estimation of blocks. And in my book, again, Deja Vu has everything already been, I calculated it for just curiosity, because I found out initially that 2.3 million blocks for about 20 years of building of the Great Pyramid would mean that each block was cut, then transported to the place, then put on the exact place in the Great Pyramid, some of which are very, very high in the air, every about 2 to 4 minutes. And I was, it's impossible even nowadays. If we had all the blocks laid together on the construction site, we have all the blocks and okay guys, let's put them and let's build from them, like from Legos, the Great Pyramid. It would be impossible for us to get and put each block each 2 or 4 minutes. It would be impossible, of course. But then, okay, I thought Zahi Hawass is telling us that there were less blocks in it. However, I calculated it already a few years ago in my book, because he was talking about it in older books also. And it would be then, in his calculations, 1 block cut from the quarry, transported to the place and put in the exact place that it was needed to be put, even 9 minutes. Each one 9 minutes, which is still very, very improbable, very, very impossible. And Zahi Hawass in this interview told us that the pyramid was built in 25 years, so not 25, but still, even each block put each 10 minutes. I think it's beyond possible. Maybe the Great Pyramid was built, okay, in 100 years, 300 years. Maybe, okay, I would accept that with primitive tools. Okay, maybe like that. Or for 500 years, even later sources like medieval Arab chroniclers, after they, of course, took over Egypt after the Roman Empire, they went there and they asked local Coptic people their lore about the pyramids. And they, of course, told of the famous Surid vision that there was King Surid about 300 years before the Great Flood. He had a dream that there will be flood, and he built the pyramids to store all the artifacts and knowledge from this great deluge. So even in this version, there is 300 years of building the pyramids. And I would say that even primitive but not very advanced people in 300 years, maybe they will be able to build a pyramid. It is much more realistic than Khufu building it within 25 years. And my calculations were based on 24 hours a day of workforce. And in Zahi Hawass interviews, there were plenty of things. Like, for instance, every 10 days, according to Zahi Hawass, they took a day off. So that even limits the possibilities of the building of the pyramids.
Darren, you got any questions?
What is it? Is the pyramids kind of your main one? Like, if you had to pick one piece of evidence from all of it, what sort of, if you could only show people one thing, you got 5 minutes to convince them that there was an ancient civilization, what would it be?
I think the previous example of megaliths would be a little bit better to explain in 5 minutes. However, I think the Great Pyramid of Giza is another smoking gun. However, from a different perspective, because as I mentioned, I was researching the prehistoric measures of the Earth, and I think that in the Great Pyramid of Giza, even let's accept the mainstream vision that the Great Pyramid was built by Khufu about 2500 years before current era. Let's accept that for a moment. I think that even if we accept that, we see in the Great Pyramid of Giza knowledge that was beyond the knowledge of ancient Egyptians at these times or even at later times. We have these measures of the Earth which can be found in the dimensions, because the Great Pyramid of Giza is encoding in it is actually a model of the northern hemisphere of the Earth on a scale 1 to 43,200. 43,200, 432, of course, nowadays in conspiracy theories, New Age stuff, famous number. However, it was already famous in the ancient times. It was, for instance, one of the numbers found in the Rig Veda. It was one of the sacred numbers. Also, the number 108 was there. However, we may not accept that. We may accept, okay, it is a coincidence. However, what it means that if we have the base of the pyramid, and if we, let's say, multiply the base of the pyramid by this magic number 43220, and then we again multiply the height of the pyramid by the same number, we see the dimensions of the northern hemisphere, of the half of Earth. However, we have, I think, bigger, less controversial ones, because some skeptics may say, no, this is a coincidence, blah, blah, blah. However, for instance, we know that both numbers pi and phi, so the golden ratio, are encoded in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And we know from, for instance, I found some sources telling us that ancient Egyptians approximated pi to 3. So it is 3.14 and so on, and they approximated it only to 3. So they are very primitive at maths. And we see in the Great Pyramid very, very precision when it comes to number pi and also to number phi, which is also, the golden ratio is also encoded in the Great Pyramid, which was beyond the knowledge of the ancient Egyptians at that time. And why the measures of the Earth? I think these are connected, because why I said that the Great Pyramid of Giza is less of an example than the megaliths, because in order to say that the Great Pyramid of Giza is some kind connected to the previous civilization, I think you should go either in a way it is impossible for primitive people to cut the stones, move the stones, etc. However, I think maybe it took them 300 or more years. Maybe it would be possible. I would say there are some attempts showing us that with primitive tools you can cut some stones to some extent. However, what I am saying is that these measures of the Earth only make sense with the lost civilization if you already have all the other points I talked about. So the global megalithic architecture all over the world, fingerprints of these people in kinds of measures of the Earth, traveling of the Earth. We see similar teachers of mankind in all the sources traveling through the entire planet. We see megaliths all over the world. We see these anomalous maps, which are from plenty of regions of the world, both Americas, Europe, Asia, or even the famous Antarctica ones, showing us some details of that. And I think that the Great Pyramid is the key if you know the other stuff. And then you can say, I would say a bit primitively maybe, that maybe ancient Egyptians were not able to construct the Great Pyramid. It is an argument, but I think a much lower one than showing all the similarities between architecture all over the world, from isolated places, from places miles and miles apart of each other, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles apart. So I think that the Great Pyramid of Giza is the second best example of some kind of lost civilization. I think even that the first to some extent evidence for that. Maybe not evidence. Evidence is a bad word, but I think first threat would be, of course, Plato's Timaeus and Critias. And going from open mind, we do not know, let's say, anything about Atlantis. Going what is said there and analyzing each point. Let's say the day of Atlantis, 9,000 years, the date, 9,000 years before Solon. The fact that Solon was traveling through Egypt. The fact that it were Egyptians who told Solon, and then I mentioned the Egyptians' kings list, which are telling us also of very, very remote eras, even before 9,000 years before Solon. And if we analyze that and analyze each of the points, location of Atlantis beyond the Straits of Hercules, Gibraltar, so beyond the Mediterranean Sea. It is clearly stated in Plato's dialogues that it is beyond the Mediterranean, somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean, and he even says that after the Atlantic Ocean, there is a continent surrounding it. And if we take a look at map and maybe angle it a little bit different than modern maps, and if we sail through the Straits of Gibraltar out of the Mediterranean, we will see that Americas are actually maybe this continent that surrounds the Atlantic. There are only, of course, kinds of ways at the bottom and at the top of the Americas, but Americas are really surrounding from this point of view of a person sailing from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. These are the continents surrounding. So if we analyze all the details, we'll see that Plato's story of Atlantis has plenty of facts stated in that. So if there are plenty of facts, from geographical facts to historical facts, maybe some kinds of other details of these lost civilizations are also true.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I was going to ask you about that Atlantis and the location. So do you have any thoughts about Atlantis? Was it more than one location? Was it just a name for the global civilization, or was it the Azores or the Richat structure or Egypt? Because Colby also mentions here in the chats, if the Richat structure was a potential location for Atlantis, why isn't the Tin Bider crater considered as well? It has concentric rings, dried up rivers in North Africa plateau that has water erosion. So
yes, that's a great question. I would say that I'm rather a proponent of Atlantis somewhere near the Azores or near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, because through the Atlantic Ocean there is a Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and if there were movements of tectonic plates, some kind of civilization could have just gotten beneath one plate, so it would vanish completely, and actually nowadays we couldn't even find it because it is deep beneath other tectonic plate, completely crashed by this plate. I think it is probable, maybe not 100% what was the fate of Atlantis. I think that the Richat structure is a nice coincidence that it coincides with these concentric rings. Similar, there is also a debate if the measures are correct 100%, but I would say I have no problem with there being a little bit different measures, let's say by 20-30% than what is Plato saying in his two dialogues. And I've seen some skeptics saying that, oh, we have evidence that it is natural formation. And I think that the Sahara, of course, we know was lush. There were plenty of rivers in Sahara during the times after, let's say, and before the times of Atlantis. And I'd say that, yes, probably Richat structure could be the place when Atlantis was located. However, even thinking about it, how it was destroyed, that nowadays we have all of these concentric rings, but nothing there. I think there were some people who came to the Richat structure, not many. And, maybe we haven't dug very deeply into the Richat structure, but I think some kind of stones, I don't know, bricks or bigger stones would be still found. If we are talking about Atlantis or the people who left this megalithic architecture, or maybe there were different people, who knows, maybe some of these megaliths would survive this catastrophe, or because, if there was such a catastrophe that nowadays we have only Richat structure and there is nothing on it, we do not see any kind of megaliths, any kinds of structures there, all these concentric rings would also vanish. There wouldn't be these concentric rings. I'm worried about that maybe Richat structure is a coincidence, but I think that, when we didn't, a few years ago, when it wasn't so many things about Richat structure, we didn't know much about it. It was the place, it was the exact thing that the Atlantis was described as. And maybe there is something beneath the rigid structure, but I imagine if all the things were wiped out, these concentric rings would also be wiped out, would also be there. So I'm more inclined into somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean actual sinking, because Atlantis sank, but then it dried up. I'm open to the rigid structure hypothesis. However, I see some negative points about that. Some points that are more likely when we accept Atlantis somewhere underneath the waters on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, Randall's done a lot of work that seems to point to some geological evidence of that too. So, Darren, what were you going to say there?
Well, we'll find out, I guess, when we go there later this year. We'll let you know what we find.
Yeah.
You're going there?
We're going there in November with Randall Carlson. Yeah.
Ooh, that would be nice. Yeah, you need to message me what you find there.
Well, there's still one ticket left, so maybe
I think I won't manage to do that, but
where
it would be great, of course.
It should be good. We'll let you know how it goes. I'm sure we'll do more. Alexander, this has been great. Where can people get the book? Where can they follow your work? Do you have any websites, social media?
Yes, I have most of the social media like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I have a website. You can just put my name and surname into Google or any kind of social media. You will find me for sure. And if it was in English, it is my English stuff, because I'm in Poland. I have also Polish social media, but there is always Polska, Poland in there. And when it's global or without any of this, it is me. My book is, of course, Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, and it is only available in English on Amazon, but on most Amazons in US, Canada, Australia, Great Britain, and many others, plenty of Amazons on Amazon. Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, and I think that the easiest way would be copy and paste my name and surname, and then for sure you will find me.
Awesome. Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you too.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for staying up late for us, Alexander.
No problem. It was really, really great conversation.
All right, let's do this again.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Take care, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that was our chat with Aleksander Czeszkiewicz.
Oh, well, I had it written down. Czeszkiewicz.
Oh, you had it all written down in
Czeszkiewicz.
Yeah.
Yeah. I heard somebody else do it. I'm like, I better write that down. Czeszkiewicz.
Yeah, it's a good show. I appreciate that. It was a fun one.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm so tempted to just bring up the map when he's talking like that, right? About that. I've got that new bathymetric one saved on my computer. It's just so awesome.
It's too bad because it gives you all the elevations, right? The problem is it takes over the show once. So we could do a whole show just on that map.
We should do it one day.
We should do it.
Just look around, because I mean, it really is quite amazing when you see the different sort of, it's different. It's showing continents under the ocean, really, or new continents. Like expanded ones. So that was fun.
Look around and theorize. Big thanks to Alexander for coming on the
show. Shout out to Rye, our buddy Rye.
Mexican Rye?
Yeah, he suggested Alexander. He was on his podcast too. So
what's it called? Codex of Curiosities?
Yeah.
There you have it. So shout out to Rye the Mexican. Big thanks to Alexander for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of the 1% that chooses to support the work over at grimerica.ca/support. If you are getting some value from our little show here, head over to grimerica.ca/support today. Sign up for monthly or make a one-time donation. We are unmonetizable on YouTube. So even if you're watching on YouTube, you're not really supporting unless you go to the link and support. We'd appreciate that. That would make you a noble instead of a pleb. You wouldn't be a pleb anymore. You wouldn't be a Grimerican pleb. You'd be a noble. We'd have to address you with class, and you could even get up to Lord or Lady if you had donated that $1,000 over time. So that's something to look into. grimerica.ca/support. Sign up for monthly. Make a one-time donation today, and we'll read your note on the show too. So extra bonus. Check that out. Of course, check out grimericaoutlaw.ca for other podcasts. grimericaCBD.com for tinctures and gummies and stuff like that. We got adultbrain.ca with well over 150 audiobooks and ebooks and all sorts of stuff like that. And contact at the cabin for trips and events. Maybe you want to come and look for Atlantis with us, Randall Carlson. 1 spot left as of the recording of this. So check that out. It's getting exciting too. We're starting to do stuff. We're starting to really hammer down the itinerary and book the inter-island flights and all that fun stuff. So contact at thecabin.com. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.